So there are two readings for this morning's message. And the first one's going to sound familiar because it's a repeat of last week, but I've tacked on a little bit more. And it is from the birth narrative of Jesus in Luke, which y'all know is one of my favorites, Luke 2:8-14 this week. Now in that same region there were shepherds living in the fields, keeping watch over their flock by night. Suddenly an angel of the Lord stood before them, and the glory of the Lord shone round about them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Fear not, for see, I am bringing you good news of great joy for all people. For unto you is born this day in the city of David a Savior, which is Christ the Lord. And this will be a sign unto you. You will find the baby wrapped in swaddling clothes, lying in a manger." And suddenly there was with the angel a multitude of the heavenly host, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest, and on earth peace, goodwill to all." And then I'm going to jump to the end of John, the Christian Gospel of John, where Jesus, the grown-up, is speaking to his disciples shortly before his crucifixion. "Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Do not let them be afraid." So I don't know about you, but it's kind of hard to believe that the 4 weeks already of Advent have passed. They've gone quickly. And, it might be that I'm rushing things a little bit to use a passage spoken by the not yet born baby Jesus on Advent. And I think I did that last week too, but I'll get to the relevance of that in a minute. As I was preparing today's message, though, there were some points that kind of floated up to me. And first, I chose the order of these Advent attributes, and I realized how kind of complex each step has gotten, more and more complex, and they're kind of piled up on top of each other now. We began Advent with hope, and that is layered with belief and trust that are required to live into a new story for ourselves or for others and even the world. The second week, which I just briefly touched on, was on faith, which requires conviction and courage and confidence. And then last week we explored joy, which is also layered. It's actually built on gratitude and self-awareness. The complexity of peace, which is this week's Advent attribute, is part of why I really wrestled with this as to what direction to take the message in. In fact, Mary's like, "You got the hymns?" It's like, I don't know. Because I like for them to line up, but this week was tough because there's yet again that inward perspective. And when y'all get tired of that, you let me know. This inner part of peace that is woven with hope and faith and joy. And then there's also that outward perspective that is layered with every single facet of the Advent attributes. So who knew? It's like, I didn't know the darkness of Advent could be so complicated. No wonder it's part of what it's about. But then I thought, every journey in life, when we take it step by step, like we've done this Advent journey, we can begin to embody the light more deeply and more intentionally. Just take it easy. Take it little by little. What's in front of you, what is most important. So another observation that occurred to me is reflected in this morning's readings. First, as we read the gospel the Christian Gospel of Luke. The announcement from the angel who appeared before the terrified, in fact, the angel terrified the shepherds, as well as from the multitude of heavenly hosts who joined in. That message starts with fear not, and it ends with peace on earth, goodwill to all. That angelic decree begins with a command of set your fears aside, and it ends with the declaration of kindness and high regard and peace to every being. Now I kind of want to leapfrog into John, the night of Jesus' birth to the days preceding his crucifixion, when we read about him teaching his disciples in John. But this time Jesus begins with peace. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. Just like joy. And it ends with the same directive as the angels who announce his birth. Do not let your hearts be troubled. Fear not. The beginning and the ending of this human life bear the complex message to all of us. Don't be afraid and be at peace. So I had to stop and think, fear is an obstacle to peace. I don't know about you. I grew up in a big family. I was always afraid I was not going to get my share. And most likely that was true. But that fear kept me from being at peace. Whether or not we have peace or we're pursuing peace, peace boils down to choice. We may feel afraid and yet still take a step toward peace. And even in taking that step, we are choosing peace. This is true of our desire for inner peace as much as it is true for seeking peace with others and among others. We're facing our fears when we consciously choose peace. I want to illustrate this. This example from New Garden Friends meeting actually woke me up like at 3 o'clock in the morning. One of the nights I was wrestling with what's the message here. It happened many moons ago. In fact, it was a long, long time ago, decades, that there was a great debate among New Garden Friends as to whether or not the quality of worship would be improved by an organ.
Oh.
Y'all can imagine the discussions that ensued to whether or not the very idea of fancy music in the meeting house was appropriate. Shouldn't a piano be enough, right? So we've done well with the piano, but this was the debate. So in the end, the use of an organ was approved, and they found the most inexpensive organ they could find to justify it. So some 30 years later, in first day meeting for worship, the organist put his hands on the keyboard and touched it, and it went squeak. I always called it a Ford Pinto. You remember those? But they got 30 years out of it. And then we all turned and looked, and he put his hands over it again. He didn't even touch it, and it went, whoa. And it's like, I think it's dead.
Oliver Shalom.
Yeah. So after it was determined, they tried to determine that it could be repaired. They really wanted to fix it. That debate about, do we need to have an organ in the meeting house, just went right back to 30 years before. Had the organ actually enhanced meeting for worship? And then was it really justified? The cost of a replacement organ was a lot. And in fact, a cheap organ wasn't cheap. And that was part of the debate. So, that kind of money could do a lot of good in a lot of places, was a big part of the debate. So the music committee at New Garden held several threshing sessions for the discussion of all of these questions. And at the end of the final threshing session, the clerk of the committee stood up in front of us who were there. And it was quite a group because it was an important topic. And you have to know that this man had a vested interest in replacing the organ. He was a trained classical musician, and he was a full professor of music at Guilford College. So it meant a lot to him to have the breadth and depth of music that an organ could bring us. But he just stood there, and I remember him looking around the room, looking at each person around the meeting room. And after a few minutes, he said something so profound that I can, with my memory, repeat the story some decades ago. He kind of boomed because, he was used to projecting his voice. Friends, he said, my sense of this meeting is that all of those present are in favor of replacing the organ. And then he said, however, those who are opposed are not in this room. And I'm like, okay. Wow. He said, I recommend that we adjourn until the time that we might all be present, gather for fair discussion in order to reach a fair outcome. And we adjourned.
Wow.
Yep. And as I sat there, I thought to myself, did he just say what I thought he said? I mean, this is his chance. Go for it. He was willing to face the fear of not getting an organ at all. It was an all or nothing deal, in order to ensure that those who were not at the table were not only invited, but able to attend yet another threshing session. He didn't take advantage of their absence to push through his agenda to get approval for a new organ. In order for him and others in the meeting to have peace, he set aside his fear. He risked not getting his own way or getting his share or whatever fear it was. That, to me, is peace that passes understanding. So in the end, the purchase of another inexpensive organ was approved, but with a caveat. We had to raise an equal amount, the purchase amount also doubled, for distribution among specific nonprofits. Wow. And you would think, well, that kind of money, we just doubled it? But that peaceful outcome left everyone feeling heard and kindly regarded. And it also took very little time to accomplish, to raise that kind of money, because everyone was invested at that point. They felt heard. So to me, choosing peace over fear isn't as easy as it might sound. What might look like peace to another person may simply be peace at the expense of someone else's silence. The peaceful error that endured around the birth of Jesus, Pax Romana, wasn't actually peace at all. Do y'all remember? The soldiers were walking the streets armed to ensure peace. I'm going to probably keep my mouth shut if someone has a gun to my face, or whatever they were wielding then. It wasn't actually peace if you were part of that 90% of people who lived in fear of Roman imperialism. Peace isn't always even the absence of war any more than it's the absence of disagreements. That's just what my mama would call playing pretty. It's like, don't stir it up. When the viewpoints and perspectives of others are silenced by a majority or even a powerful minority, I used to call it as a change manager, the majority of one, because that was the one who held the power. That ain't peace. It's faux peace. When those who are different or those who disagree aren't at the table, they're not included in the discussion, that ain't peace. All these only just keep the peace, and they don't make peace. If we're in a majority, we have to risk our fear of losing control, because that's what that represents. And if we're in a minority, we have to face our fear of speaking truth to power. Neither one are easy. Well, just as we've seen every other aspect of the Advent journey, peace starts with an inside job. It begins with an honest self-assessment of and a reflection on where are we choosing fear over peace. Peace is lived out as we seek to embody the light of Christmas. So your challenge this week is some inner work and some outward reflection. What fear or maybe fears keep you from choosing peace? Is there a fear that motivates you more strongly than your desire for peace? And it could be just a habit, this fear. How can you begin to acknowledge those fears? Pay attention to them. And then still take a step toward a peace that passes understanding. You could even say to your fearful self, I don't understand this, but I need peace. So work with me. In your family, in the groups and communities you're a part of, begin to pay attention to the dominant voices, even if it's a dominant majority of one. Who always gets their say? A capital M mother often gets her way. Who is getting their way most of the time? Who's keeping the peace by keeping silent? You see them. They're in the corner against the wall. What role can you play in shifting those group dynamics into a better, more peaceful balance? It might take you through some turbulence, but it takes you to peace. Lastly, look at around your life and at your groups. Who isn't at the table? That can't even speak? Who doesn't get a chance to share from their perspective? As minor as this may seem, I've observed it some time ago that my social media connections looked a whole lot like me. And so I intentionally began to seek out and connect with people who differed from me, whether that was race-wise or age-wise, young whippersnappers, the ability-wise, gender-wise, even weight and size-wise. I realized I had a judgment when really round fingers were demonstrating a latest art project. It's like, oh my, I noticed my own prejudices, my own preconceived notions, and even my limited perspectives. And actually expanded my sense of peace in my online communities. So as we take these final steps toward the light of Christmas, let's embrace the complexities of hope and faith and joy and peace. They're complex, but we know that the more we grow and nurture these divine aspects, the greater that each one of them can be birthed through us, through our own light, and out into the world. And so it is. Amen.